A veteran German Tiger commander who had destroyed over 30 Allied tanks on the Eastern Front watched in disbelief as 6 inferior American Shermans systematically obliterated his entire battalion in the hedgerows of Normandy. Years later, as a POW working in an American tank depot, he would discover the terrifying truth that made his blood run cold, and it had nothing to do with the tanks themselves. What did he see in that depot that made him realize Germany never stood a chance? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The summer of 1944 brought hell to the fields of Normandy. Just weeks after D-Day, Allied forces were pushing inland from the beaches, but progress was slow and bloody. The French countryside wasn't open farmland like the propaganda posters showed. It was bocage country, a nightmare landscape of ancient hedgerows that turned every field into a fortress and every road into a potential grave. Thick walls of earth and tangled roots rose 10 feet high, some of them centuries old, creating a maze where you couldn't see more than 50 yards in any direction. For tank crews, it was like fighting blindfolded in a series of small rooms, never knowing what waited around the next corner. The German army was bleeding and retreating, but they still had one card to play that made American tankers wake up sweating at night: the Tiger tank. This beast weighed 60 tons and mounted an 88mm gun that could punch through a Sherman's armor from over a mile away. Its frontal armor was 4 inches thick, twice what the Sherman had. On the Eastern Front, single Tiger tanks had destroyed entire Soviet columns. German crews called them invincible, and they had good reason to believe it. Every German tanker knew the math. 1 Tiger equaled 10 enemy tanks. It was drilled into them from training, reinforced by every battle they survived. Commander Hans Weber sat in his Tiger that morning with the confidence of a man who had fought at Kursk and lived to tell about it. His crew had killed 32 Russian tanks in 2 years. They were professionals, products of a military system that prized technical superiority and individual excellence above all else. Weber's Tiger was a masterpiece of German engineering, a weapon so advanced that Allied tankers reportedly refused to engage them head-on. The Wehrmacht propaganda posters showed Tigers crushing inferior enemy machines under their treads, and Weber had seen it happen with his own eyes dozens of times. The Americans, he had been told since the beginning, were soft. They were a mongrel nation of factory workers and farmers playing soldier, relying on quantity over quality because they lacked the discipline and racial superiority to build truly great weapons. Their Sherman tanks were nicknamed Ronsons by their own crews after the cigarette lighter because they burned so easily when hit. German intelligence reports said the Americans were terrified of Tigers, that they would retreat or call for air support rather than fight them directly. Weber had heard captured Americans had standing orders to avoid Tiger engagements if possible. So when Weber's platoon of 8 Tigers rounded a hedgerow that afternoon and spotted 6 American Shermans in the next field, he almost smiled. The Americans were trapped, boxed in by the high hedgerows with nowhere to run. His gunner was already ranging the first target. This would be over in minutes, just another entry in his combat log. But then, something happened that wasn't supposed to be possible. The Shermans didn't retreat. They didn't call for air support or artillery. Instead, their engines roared to life and they charged forward, splitting into 2 groups and racing toward the hedgerows on either side of the field. What were they doing? Weber's gunner fired first, the 88-millimeter gun cracking like thunder. The shot hit empty ground where a Sherman had been 2 seconds earlier. Before they could reload, 3 Shermans opened fire from different angles. The coordination was impossible, unnatural. German tanks used flags and hand signals to communicate in battle. These Americans were talking to each other somehow, moving like fingers on the same hand. Weber's radio crackled with panicked voices as the Tiger next to him exploded, its ammunition cooking off in a fountain of flame. How did they flank us so fast? The battle lasted 18 minutes. When it was over, 6 Tigers were burning hulks, and 2 had retreated with damaged tracks. All 6 American Shermans were still moving. Weber's crew abandoned their crippled Tiger and ran through the hedgerows until American infantry captured them an hour later. He kept replaying it in his mind, trying to understand what went wrong. The Tigers had better guns, better armor, better training, but the Shermans moved like a pack of wolves while the Tigers fought like lonely kings. 3 days later, Weber stood in an American prisoner of war camp, still wearing his burnt Tankley uniform. A guard assigned him to work detail at a supply depot 5 miles behind the front lines. What he saw there made his stomach turn. Hundreds of Sherman tanks sat in neat rows, fresh off the ships from England. More tanks than he had seen in his entire career with the Wehrmacht. Crews were working on damaged Shermans, but not carefully repairing them like German mechanics did. They were pulling parts off one tank and bolting them onto another in minutes. Everything was the same. Every Sherman used the same engine, same tracks, same radio, same gun. When one broke, they didn't fix it, they just grabbed another. An American sergeant noticed Weber staring and walked over. The sergeant offered him a cigarette, which Weber took with shaking hands. Through a translator, Weber asked how many Sherman tanks America had built. The sergeant shrugged and said, around 50,000, maybe more. He said it like he was talking about making shoes. Weber had read intelligence reports that Germany had built about 1,300 Tigers total. The entire production run of Germany's best weapon wouldn't fill one corner of this depot. The sergeant pointed at a damaged Sherman with a hole punched through its side. 2 crew members had died, he explained, but 3 escaped through the hatches. They would be back in a new tank tomorrow. Weber thought about his Tiger, how the hatches were small and hard to reach, how crews often burned alive when hit. The Americans designed their tanks knowing they would be destroyed. They planned for their men to survive and fight again. Germans built their tanks to never be destroyed, and crews died when that promise failed. That night, Weber lay on his cot in the POW barracks and realized something that made him feel cold inside. The Americans weren't trying to build a better tank, they were trying to win a war. There was a difference, and Germany had never understood it. Weber's work detail continued for 3 months, and each day brought new evidence that everything he had been taught was a lie. He watched American crews receive their tanks fresh from the factory. The Shermans arrived with instruction manuals written in simple language with pictures, designed so that a farmer from Iowa could maintain them with basic tools. German tank manuals were technical documents that required engineering knowledge to understand. The Americans treated their tanks like tractors. Germans treated theirs like works of art. One afternoon, Weber was sorting spare parts when he found something that changed everything. Boxes and boxes of rubber tracks, engine parts, transmission gears, all identical and interchangeable. He picked up a track link and realized it would fit any Sherman in the depot. Then he thought about his Tiger, how every part was custom-made, how waiting for a replacement transmission could take weeks, how mechanics needed specialized tools for every repair. The Americans had built stupidity into their system on purpose. Any Sherman could donate parts to any other Sherman. Any crew could operate any tank. It was brilliant in a way that made Weber angry at his own commanders. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The moment that broke him came during the Christmas season of 1944. American guards brought the prisoners extra food, and Weber received more calories in one meal than he usually got in 3 days in the Wehrmacht. He sat with his small portion of turkey and potatoes and thought about his family in Hamburg, probably eating watery soup if they were lucky. An American guard sat down across from him and shared a Coca-Cola, something Weber had only seen in propaganda posters that mocked American excess. The guard was friendly, asking about Weber's family through a translator. There was no hatred in his eyes, no sense of superiority. Just a young man doing his job. Weber asked the translator a question that had haunted him since Normandy. Why did the Americans build the Sherman when they could have built something better? The guard thought for a moment, then explained through the translator that America needed to ship tanks across an ocean, land them on beaches, move them through destroyed cities, keep them running with crews who were civilians 6 months ago, and do it all while building thousands of planes and ships and trucks at the same time. The Sherman wasn't the best tank, it was the right tank. That night, Weber wrote in a journal he had started keeping. His hands shook as he formed the words in German. We were taught that 1 German equals 10 Americans. We never considered that America would simply send 11. We built the Tiger to inspire fear and respect. The Americans built the Sherman to win a war. Our engineers wanted perfection. Their engineers wanted victory. We believed our own propaganda about racial superiority, and it blinded us to what actually wins wars. Not the best weapon, but the best system. Weber returned to Germany in the spring of 1946, stepping off a crowded train into what used to be Hamburg. The city he remembered was gone. Entire neighborhoods had been bombed into rubble. Children played in the ruins of apartment buildings. His own street was a maze of broken concrete and twisted metal. The contrast hit him like a physical blow. He had just spent 18 months surrounded by American abundance, watching supplies flow like water, eating better as a prisoner than he ever had as a soldier. Now he was home, and home was a graveyard. His neighbors gathered around him that first week, hungry for stories about the war. They wanted to hear about German victories, about heroic last stands, about how they were betrayed by weak leadership. An old friend asked if it was true that Germany would have won if they had built more Tigers and jet fighters. Weber felt something break inside him. He told them the truth they didn't want to hear. More Tigers would have meant nothing without fuel to run them, without trained crews to operate them, without a system to support them. Germany had built museums while America built armies. The years passed and Weber watched his country struggle to accept what had happened. Politicians made excuses. Veterans told stories about being stabbed in the back. But Weber kept a small photograph in his pocket, creased and faded from handling. It showed 6 Sherman tanks in a field in Normandy, taken by an American photographer after the battle. He had found it among captured documents during his work detail and kept it hidden. Those 6 tanks had taught him more about war than 4 years of Wehrmacht service. He began speaking to youth groups in the 1950s, invited by teachers who wanted the next generation to understand what really happened. Standing before rooms of German teenagers, Weber would tell them about the Tiger and the Sherman. He explained that Germany had lost because it valued the wrong things: pride over pragmatism, individual excellence over teamwork, perfection over adaptability. The students always asked the same question: weren't German tanks better? Weber would smile sadly and explain that being better didn't matter if you couldn't build enough of them, couldn't fuel them, couldn't replace them when they broke. Germany had built museums while America built armies. The years passed, and Weber watched his country struggle to accept what had happened. Politicians made excuses. Veterans told stories about being stabbed in the back. But Weber kept a small photograph in his pocket, creased and faded from handling. It showed 6 Sherman tanks in a field in Normandy, taken by an American photographer after the battle. He had found it among captured documents during his work detail and kept it hidden. Those 6 tanks had taught him more about war than 4 years of Wehrmacht service. He began speaking to youth groups in the 1950s, invited by teachers who wanted the next generation to understand what really happened. Standing before rooms of German teenagers, Weber would tell them about the Tiger and the Sherman. He explained that Germany had lost because it valued the wrong things: pride over pragmatism, individual excellence over teamwork, perfection over adaptability. The students always asked the same question: weren't German tanks better? Weber would smile sadly and explain that being better didn't matter if you couldn't build enough of them, couldn't fuel them, couldn't replace them when they broke. On a warm day in 1962, Weber returned to Normandy for the first time since the war. He walked through the fields where his Tiger had burned, now peaceful farmland with cattle grazing. He found the spot where those 6 Shermans had shattered his world and placed flowers on the ground. An old French farmer watched him from a distance, probably wondering what this German was doing. Weber touched the photograph in his pocket one last time and spoke out loud to no one in particular. "You shocked us, not with your steel, but with your thinking. We built weapons to win battles. You built a system to win the war. And in the end, that made all the difference." He understood now what his commanders never did. War isn't won by having the best tool, it's won by using the right tools together, intelligently, with purpose. Germany had built Tigers to prove they were superior. America had built Shermans to come home. Weber stayed in Normandy for 3 days, walking the hedgerow country where his understanding of everything had collapsed in 18 bloody minutes. The fields looked so different now, peaceful and quiet, with no smoke or screams or the smell of burning diesel and flesh. He checked into a small inn run by a French couple who eyed him suspiciously, until he explained in broken French that he had come to remember, not to celebrate. The old woman softened then and brought him coffee, real coffee, something he still couldn't take for granted, even 17 years after the war ended.
Each morning, he would walk the rods and try to reconstruct that afternoon in his mind. Here was where his platoon had rounded the hedgerow, confident and ready. There was where the Shermans had been waiting, engines already running. He could still remember the sound they made, different from German engines, a higher pitch that announced American steel before you even saw it. His gunner had been so certain of that first shot, and why wouldn't he be? They had killed Russian T-34s at twice that range. But the Sherman had moved impossibly fast, and suddenly the comfortable mathematics of tank warfare had stopped making sense. What haunted Weber most was how quickly it had happened. 18 minutes from first contact to total defeat. 18 minutes to destroy the myth of German technical superiority that had been built over years of careful propaganda. He had watched his friends die in those minutes, good men who believed they were fighting in the best tanks ever made. They died confused, unable to understand why their training and equipment had failed them. Some of them probably died still believing they were superior, that this was just bad luck or a temporary setback. Weber knew better now. It wasn't bad luck. It was mathematics and logistics and industrial philosophy, and Germany had been wrong about all of it. On his last morning in Normandy, Weber met an American veteran at a small war memorial near the beach. The man was older than Weber, maybe 60, with gray hair and a limp that suggested old wounds. They recognized something in each other without speaking, that particular awareness veterans have when they meet. Through careful English that Weber had learned over the years, they began to talk. The American had been a Sherman commander in the 2nd Armored Division. He had fought in this same area in the summer of 1944. Weber asked the question that had lived in his chest for 18 years. Had the American been scared of the Tigers? The old soldier laughed and said of course he was. Every Sherman crew was terrified of Tigers. Their guns could kill you from so far away that you never even saw them. But then the American said something Weber had never considered. He said the fear made them better tankers. It made them learn to use terrain, to coordinate with their friends, to never fight fair. He said American doctrine taught them that if they met a tiger head-on in open ground, they would die. So they learned to never be in that situation. Weber nodded slowly and pulled out his photograph of the 6 Shermans. The American looked at it for a long moment, then smiled with recognition. He pointed at the 2nd tank in the line and said that was his Sherman, or at least the same model and unit markings. He had been in this exact battle. Weber felt his heart start to pound. This man, this casual American grandfather visiting France with his wife, had been one of the 6 who destroyed his entire world. They stood in silence for a moment, and then both men started laughing. It was absurd and terrible and somehow funny. 2 old soldiers meeting at the scene of their shared trauma like it was a class reunion. They talked for 2 hours. The American explained how they had done it. Radio coordination was the key, he said. Every Sherman commander could talk to every other Sherman commander instantly. They had practiced these flanking maneuvers dozens of times in England before the invasion. When they saw the Tigers that day, they had executed a standard tactic, nothing special or heroic, just training and teamwork. 3 Shermans had gone left, while 3 went right, and they had agreed on radio which ones would fire first to draw attention while the others maneuvered for side shots. It was like a football play, the American said, and Weber understood the metaphor even though he had never seen American football. Weber shared his own story then, about being captured and working in the supply depot, about seeing the endless rows of Sherman tanks and understanding for the first time that Germany had never had a chance. The American nodded seriously and said that was the truth people didn't like to hear. Bravery and skill mattered in individual battles, but wars are won by factories and supply lines and the ability to replace losses faster than the enemy. He said America had lost plenty of Shermans, thousands of them, and good men had died in those tanks. But there was always another Sherman, another crew, another chance. Germany couldn't say the same about Tigers. The American's wife called him then, saying they needed to leave to catch their train. Before he went, the old tanker shook Weber's hand and said something that Weber would remember for the rest of his life. He said that both of them had been doing their jobs that day in 1944, following orders and trying to survive. Neither of them had started the war or chosen to be enemies, but they had both lived through it and learned from it, and that made them lucky. Most men who fought in that hedgerow country weren't lucky. They were dead or broken. The 2 of them got to be old men having coffee in France, and that was a gift not to waste. Weber walked back to his inn with tears on his face. He thought about all the years he had spent trying to make young Germans understand what really happened in the war. He had focused on the technical details, on logistics and production numbers, on the cold mathematics of industrial warfare. But maybe that wasn't the real lesson at all. Maybe the lesson was simpler and harder at the same time. Germany had believed it was special, chosen, superior by nature. That belief had made them build perfect weapons for an imperfect war. America had no such illusions. They built adequate weapons in massive numbers and used them with practical intelligence. Pride versus pragmatism, arrogance versus adaptation. On Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.